In the grand scheme of galactic civilization, few things were more mind-numbingly predictable than the Zephyrian Certification Bureau. Located on the neutral moon of Grek 7, this monument to bureaucratic tedium had been processing species classifications for the better part of 3 millennia, and Chief Assessor Vextel had been personally rubber-stamping cosmic destinies for the last 400 years of it. The office itself was a masterpiece of utilitarian design, which is to say, it looked like someone had taken the concept of bland and given it architectural form. Gray walls, gray floors, gray ceiling, and just enough artificial lighting to make everything look slightly sickly. The only splash of color came from the various species classification charts that covered one wall, displaying the rainbow of sentient life forms that had shuffled through these doors, seeking their official galactic designation. Vexthul, a being that resembled what would happen if you crossed a praying mantis with an accountant and then drained all the fun out of it, sat behind his regulation-issue desk reviewing the morning's appointments. His compound eyes, each capable of reading 17 different spectrums of light simultaneously, were currently focused on something far less impressive: paperwork. Mountains of it. Forms 847B through 847Z, each requiring signatures in triplicate, witnessed by at least 2 neutral observers, and notarized by a certified cosmic authority. The Zephyrians had turned bureaucracy into art form, and by art form, one meant the kind of art that made you question the meaning of existence, while simultaneously filling out Form 1138C, regarding your questioning of existence. At the center of the office sat the scanner capital S. Because when you've been using the same piece of precursor technology for 3,000 years without understanding how it works, you tend to develop a healthy respect for it. The device looked like someone had tried to build a particularly ambitious filing cabinet, and then decided halfway through that it should also be able to peer into the cosmic significance of any living being within a 12-foot radius. Which, coincidentally, it could. The scanner was roughly the size of a small shuttle, composed of materials that definitely weren't on any periodic table known to current science, and hummed with a kind of quiet confidence that only came from being several million years older than the civilization using it. It had exactly one function: to analyze any sentient being and determine their species' ultimate role in the grand tapestry of galactic evolution. Most species got fairly straightforward classifications. The Rigelians were marked as efficient resource managers. The Altarians earned competent diplomatic facilitators. The Arcturians received adequate cultural preservationists. The scanner had a particular talent for damning with faint praise, as if it had been programmed by the most passive-aggressive artificial intelligence in the known universe. Vexthul had seen it all: species that were destined for moderate technological progress, others marked for acceptable artistic achievement, and his personal favorite, the Betan Collective, whose entire civilization had been classified as satisfactory background participants. The Betans had not taken that well, but then again, the scanner had never been wrong, not once, not ever, which made what happened next all the more remarkable. The morning had started like any other. 3 routine certifications: a newly spacefaring species from the Vega system classified as promising mid-tier contributors, a hive mind collective from Proxima Centauri labeled dependable logistical coordinators, and a silicon-based life form from Tau Ceti designated competent mineral processing specialists. Each scan had taken exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Each species had stood in the designated scanning area, with varying degrees of nervousness, hope, and existential dread. Each had received their classification with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that would make a government office jealous. Then the human walked in. Kai Nakamura didn't look like much, which was probably the most human thing about him. Average height, average build, wearing what appeared to be a jumpsuit that had seen better decades. He carried himself with the casual confidence of someone who had spent considerable time in zero gravity and wasn't particularly impressed by artificial gravity anymore. His black hair was slightly mussed, suggesting he'd either just woken up or had been wearing a pilot's helmet, and his dark eyes held the particular brand of patient resignation that came from dealing with bureaucracy across multiple star systems. Morning. he said, approaching Vextool's desk with a kind of easy familiarity that suggested he'd done this sort of thing before. I'm here for the species certification. Got an appointment for 0900 hours. Vextool consulted his schedule, his compound eyes flickering across multiple documents simultaneously. Ah yes, Homo sapiens sapiens, Earth origin. Seeking standard galactic citizenship classification for commercial transport licensing. That's right. Kai nodded, pulling out a datapad that looked like it had been repaired with duct tape and optimism. Just need the paperwork to make my shipping runs legitimate. Nothing fancy. Nothing fancy. If Vextool had possessed human facial expressions, he might have smiled at that. Every species said something similar before their scan. They all wanted nothing fancy, right up until they discovered their cosmic destiny involved either ruling the galaxy or being its janitors. Please proceed to the scanning area. Vextool gestured toward the designated circle in front of the scanner. The process takes approximately 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Please remain stationary during analysis. Kai shrugged and walked over to the circle, stepping into it with the casual ease of someone boarding a particularly slow elevator. Sure thing. Fair warning though, I had coffee this morning, so if that machine reads caffeine as some kind of evolutionary enhancement, that's on me. The joke fell flat in the way that most human humor did when translated through 3 layers of galactic standard language protocols. But Vextool initiated the scanning sequence anyway. The scanner began its familiar warm-up routine, a low hum that gradually increased in pitch, accompanied by a series of lights that cycled through colors that most species couldn't actually perceive. 30 seconds in, the first anomaly occurred. Instead of the steady progression of diagnostic lights, the scanner's illumination began to flicker. Not dramatically, just a slight irregularity in the pattern, like a heartbeat that had skipped a beat but was trying to pretend everything was fine. Vextool frowned, which in Zephyrian body language involved a complex arrangement of mandibles that would have looked threatening to most species, but was really just the equivalent of raised eyebrows. Scanner irregularities were rarer than honest politicians and about as welcome as a supernova in a populated system. Is everything all right? Kai asked, noticing the flickering lights. Because I've got a cargo run to Centauri Prime in 6 hours, and I really need those shipping credentials. Please remain in position, Vextool replied, activating the diagnostic subroutines. Minor technical irregularity. Nothing to be concerned about. The diagnostic subroutines came back green across the board. All systems nominal. Power flow steady. Precursor technology operating within acceptable parameters. Everything was fine, according to every instrument at Vextool's disposal. The scanner continued to flicker. 2 minutes in, the second anomaly manifested. The scanner's hum, which had maintained the same pitch and frequency for 3,000 years of operation, began to waver. Not loudly, and not in a way that suggested immediate mechanical failure, but with the kind of uncertainty that suggested the machine was encountering something it had never seen before and wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Vextool had been operating precursor technology long enough to know that when ancient alien machines started acting uncertain, the appropriate response was somewhere between mild concern and existential terror. The scanner had analyzed everything from energy beings to collective consciousnesses to species that existed primarily as mathematical concepts. It had never shown uncertainty. How much longer? Kai asked, checking his chronometer. Not to rush cosmic destiny or anything, but I've got a schedule to keep. Scanning in progress. Vextool replied, which was technically true but growing less helpful by the second. He activated the backup diagnostic array, hoping to get some insight into what was causing the irregularities. The backup diagnostics immediately crashed. Not powered down, not malfunctioned. Crashed. As in, several million credits worth of Zephyrian analytical technology took one look at whatever the scanner was trying to process and decided that discretion was the better part of valor. 3 minutes in, the scanner did something that Vextool had never seen, never heard of, and would have dismissed as impossible if he wasn't watching it happen. It stopped humming entirely. The silence was somehow more unsettling than the previous uncertainties. The scanner had maintained its characteristic hum through power outages, system resets, and that one memorable incident involving a sentient energy being who had tried to possess it out of curiosity. The hum was as fundamental to its operation as gravity was to planetary orbits. "Okay, that doesn't sound normal," Kai observed, still standing patiently in the scanning circle. "Should I step out? Move around? Start reciting poetry? I know a few limericks that might help." Before Vexthul could respond, the scanner made a sound he had never heard before. A low and thrumming note that seemed to resonate not just through the air, but through the very structure of the building itself. It was the kind of sound that ancient things made when they were trying to remember something important, something they had forgotten over the course of millennia. The thrumming built in intensity, joined by harmonics that definitely weren't part of the scanner's normal operational parameters. The lights on its surface began cycling through patterns that Vexthul didn't recognize, displaying colors that his compound eyes could perceive but his brain struggled to categorize. 4 minutes in, every other piece of technology in the office shut down, not malfunctioned, not overloaded. Shut down, as if they had collectively decided that whatever the scanner was doing was so far beyond their comprehension that the most dignified response was to simply bow out gracefully. The emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in a red glow that made the situation feel appropriately apocalyptic. Vex's tool's desk terminal displayed a message he had never seen before. Analysis beyond current parameters. Consulting deep archives. Deep archives. Vex's tool muttered. The scanner had archives? 4 minutes and 37 seconds in, the time when every previous scan had concluded with tidy efficiency, the scanner fell completely silent. Not the operational silence from before. This was the silence of something that had found what it was looking for and was taking a moment to process the implications. It was the silence of a machine that had just realized it was going to have to deliver news that would change everything, and wasn't particularly looking forward to the conversation. The silence stretched and stretched. "So," Kai said eventually, "is this the part where you tell me I'm secretly the chosen one, or the part where your machine explodes? Because I've got experience with both, and I'd like to know which safety protocols to activate." The scanner responded by displaying a single line of text on its primary output screen, written in Galactic Standard, but somehow seeming more significant than mere words should be. Analysis complete. Vexthul approached the scanner with the kind of caution usually reserved for unexploded ordnance or political discussions. The output screen flickered, displaying the standard classification format he had seen thousands of times before. Species: Homo sapiens. Sapiens origin. Sol 3 Earth classification. The cursor blinked after classification. For several seconds, as if the scanner was having second thoughts about what it was about to reveal. Then, letter by letter, the classification appeared. Bearer of the fire after heaven. Vexthul stared at the screen. Then he stared at it some more. Then he activated the translation protocols, thinking perhaps there had been some error in the linguistic matrix. The translation came back identical. Bearer of the fire after heaven. "Huh," Kai said, reading over Vexthul's shoulder. "That's new. What's it mean?" What did it mean? Vexthul's mandibles clicked in what might have been panic if Zephyrians were capable of panic, which they officially weren't but which seemed to be happening anyway. Bearer of the fire after heaven wasn't just a classification, it was a legend, a myth, a bedtime story that precursor archaeologists told each other when they wanted to indulge in wild speculation about impossible futures. According to the oldest precursor texts, discovered in ruins so ancient that they predated most known civilizations, the fire after heaven was a metaphor for something beyond the precursors themselves. A stage of existence that even they, in all their cosmic wisdom and incomprehensible technology, had never achieved. The text suggested that someday, some species would arise that would surpass even the precursors, taking civilization to heights that were currently unimaginable. The bearers of this fire would be the ones to guide that transition. It was theoretical, philosophical, the kind of thing that made for interesting academic papers and absolutely nothing more. It certainly wasn't the kind of thing that was supposed to show up on a routine shipping license application. Mr. Nakamura, Vex Tools said carefully, I need to ask you some questions. Sure, Kai replied. But can we do it while you process my paperwork? Like I said, I've got a schedule. How long has your species been spacefaring? Depends on how you count it. We've been poking around our local system for about a century, proper interstellar travel for maybe 30 years. Why? And your technological development curve? Kai shrugged. Pretty standard, I guess. Fire, wheel, agriculture, industrial revolution, atomic power, spaceflight, the usual progression. Though we did have a few hiccups along the way, couple of world wars, environmental problems, some political unpleasantness. Nothing too dramatic. Nothing too dramatic. Vextel's compound eyes focused on the scanner's readout again. The machine had never been wrong. Not once. If it said this unremarkable human freight pilot represented a species destined to surpass the precursors themselves, then somehow, someway, that was exactly what was going to happen. The implications were staggering. If humanity was truly the bearer of the fire after heaven, then everything galactic politics, interspecies relations, the fundamental assumptions underlying their entire civilization would need to be reconsidered. I'm going to need to make some calls, Vextel said, reaching for his emergency communication device. Whoa, hold up, Kai interrupted. Calls? I just need a shipping license. Standard commercial transport certification. Nothing that requires calls. But Vextel was already activating the priority communication array, sending an encrypted burst transmission to the Galactic Council's Emergency Response Center. The message was simple and terrifying. Precursor prophecy confirmed. Bearers identified. Require immediate consultation. The response came back within minutes, which was unprecedented, given that galactic-level bureaucracy usually operated on geological timescales. The priority override codes were followed by a single instruction. Maintain containment. Full diplomatic team en route. Containment? Kai asked, reading the message over Vextel's shoulder again. That doesn't sound good. That sounds like the kind of word that comes right before situation, and right after we have a. Before Vextel could respond, every communication device in the building activated simultaneously. Not a coordinated conference call. Each device had received individual priority messages from different sectors of the galactic government. The Regelian Trade Federation wanted immediate consultation on economic implications. The Altarian Diplomatic Corps was demanding emergency session protocols. The Arcturian Cultural Ministry was requesting clarification on whether this development required updates to their historical archives. In the space of 10 minutes, what had been a routine morning appointment had become the most significant bureaucratic event in galactic history. Okay, Kai said, as the cacophony of incoming messages continued. I'm starting to think this is about more than just my shipping license. The understatement of the millennium would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. Vextel was beginning to realize that he might have just accidentally triggered the most significant diplomatic crisis in recorded history, simply by doing his job and processing routine paperwork. More messages poured in. The Centaurian Defense Fleet was requesting permission to establish a protective perimeter around Grek 7. The Beta Collective was demanding immediate access to all human cultural and technological data. 3 different species were formally requesting permission to establish diplomatic relations with Earth, despite the fact that most of them had never heard of the planet before this morning. This is insane, Vextel muttered, his mandibles clicking in what was definitely panic now, regardless of official Zephyrian emotional capacity. The scanner identified your species as the bearer of the fire after heaven. Do you understand what that means? Not really, Kai admitted. But I'm guessing it's important. Important. The word hung in the air, like a small, inadequate monument to understatement. Important was remembering to file quarterly reports on time. Important was following proper decontamination procedures when dealing with exotic matter. This was the kind of development that required new categories of importance. The communication devices finally fell silent, leaving behind the kind of quiet that usually preceded either enlightenment or catastrophe. In the distance, Vexthul could hear the unmistakable sound of heavy shuttles landing. The diplomatic team had arrived with what appeared to be unprecedented speed. "Mr. Nakamura," Vexthul said carefully, "I believe your shipping license application is going to require some additional processing time." "How much additional time are we talking about?" Kai asked. "Because I've really got that cargo run to Centauri Prime." Before Vexthul could answer, the office doors slid open to admit a parade of beings that represented virtually every major species in the galactic community. Regelians in their elaborate ceremonial robes, Altarians floating in their environmental suits, Arcturians with their crystalline communication arrays, and at least a dozen other species that Vexthul recognized from diplomatic functions he had never expected to attend. At the head of the group walked Ambassador Thyrolex of the Galactic Council, a being so politically significant that most people only saw her image on official broadcasts. She was tall, elegant, and radiated the kind of authority that came from managing interstellar civilization for the past several centuries. "Chief Assessor Vexthul," she said, her voice carrying the weight of cosmic responsibility, "we need to discuss the implications of your recent classification." "Of course, Ambassador," Vexthul replied, his mandibles arranging themselves into what he hoped was a diplomatically appropriate configuration. "Though I should mention that the classification was made by the scanner, not by me personally." Ambassador Thyrolex turned to look at Kai, who was still standing in the scanning circle with his hands in his pockets, looking like someone who had wandered into the wrong meeting and was too polite to leave. "Mr. Nakamura," she said formally, "on behalf of the Galactic Council, I welcome humanity to the community of starfaring species." "Thanks," Kai replied. "That's nice. Can I get my shipping license now?" The question created a moment of silence that somehow managed to be both profound and awkward. Here was a representative of a species that had just been classified as the inheritors of cosmic destiny, and he was worried about freight schedules. Ambassador Thyrolex turned back to Vexthul. "Perhaps we could speak privately." The diplomatic team ushered Vexthul into an adjoining conference room, leaving Kai alone with the scanner and his growing confusion. Through the soundproofed walls, he could hear the muffled sounds of what was either intense diplomatic negotiation or a really passionate argument about filing procedures. After what felt like several hours but was probably only 45 minutes, the diplomats emerged looking like they had just divided up the galaxy and weren't entirely sure they had done it correctly. "Mr. Nakamura," Ambassador Thyrolex announced, "the Galactic Council has decided to grant your species full diplomatic recognition and immediate admission to the Interstellar Commerce Guild." "Great," Kai said. "Does that come with a shipping license?" "It comes with considerably more than a shipping license. I really just need the shipping license." Ambassador Thyrolex paused, clearly trying to process the concept of a bearer of the fire after heaven who was primarily concerned with logistics. "Mr. Nakamura, do you understand the significance of your species classification?" "Not really," Kai admitted. "But I'm assuming it's either really good news or really bad news, and since nobody's arrested me yet, I'm going with good news." The ambassador exchanged glances with her diplomatic team, who all wore the expression of beings who had just realized that cosmic destiny might be more complicated than their training had prepared them for. "We'll prepare a comprehensive briefing on the historical and cultural implications of your species designation," she said finally. "In the meantime, yes, you'll receive your shipping license." "Excellent," Kai said, brightening considerably. "When can I pick it up?" "Immediately," Vexthul said, producing a datapad that looked far more official than anything he had ever issued before. "Standard commercial transport certification, with full interstellar privileges." Kai accepted the pad, checked it briefly, and nodded with satisfaction. "Perfect. Thanks for your time, everyone. This has been educational." He headed for the door, then paused and turned back to the assembled diplomats. "Oh, and if you need anything shipped anywhere, I run a pretty reliable freight service. Fair rates, on-time delivery." With that, he left, leaving behind a room full of beings who were still trying to process what had just happened. Ambassador Tyrell X turned to Vexthal. That's it? He just left. Apparently so, Vexthal replied, staring at the scanner, which had returned to its normal operational hum as if nothing significant had occurred. The bearer of the fire, after heaven, just walked out to make a cargo delivery. It would appear that way. Ambassador Tyrell X was quiet for a long moment. Chief Assessor, in your professional opinion, how should we handle this development? Vexthal looked at the scanner, then at the diplomatic team, then at the mountain of paperwork that would now need to be filed regarding the single most significant species classification in galactic history. Very carefully, he said finally, and with a great deal of documentation. As the diplomatic team dispersed to begin the complex process of restructuring galactic civilization around the existence of humanity, Vexthal returned to his desk and began filling out Form 847Z. Notification of Species Classification with Cosmic Implications. In the section marked Classification Significance, he wrote, Subject Species designated as bearer of the fire after heaven. Subject individual appeared primarily concerned with shipping schedules. Recommend monitoring situation with appropriate caution and possibly some confusion. He paused, mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement, and added a final note. Subject requested additional business cards for freight delivery service. Recommend favorable consideration. Outside, Kai Nakamura climbed into his battered cargo shuttle, checked his navigation computer, and began the pre-flight sequence for his run to Centauri Prime. He had 40 tons of agricultural equipment to deliver, a deadline to meet, and a universe to inherit. Though he was only really worried about the first two, the scanner hummed quietly to itself, processing the morning's remaining appointments with its usual efficiency. 3 more species were certified that day: competent technical specialists, adequate cultural contributors, and satisfactory diplomatic participants. None of them broke the universe. But then again, the universe had been waiting a very long time for someone who would.